People often underestimate their own capacity for bad behavior, not because they're evil, but because they assume their values will override their impulses. Spoiler alert, they don't. Welcome back, fellow mages, to the Grounded Mage, where we explore how myth and magic exist in everyday life. Today, we're diving into a topic that's equal parts spicy, uncomfortable, and transformational: becoming what you fear. If you've ever had a moment where you've acted exactly like the person you swore you'd never become, congratulations. You've unlocked a core human achievement: Shadow Self, Level 1. This episode is all about the inner beast, the hidden impulses, the moral duality that makes us both lovable and occasionally terrifying. Think Gollum, Dr. Jekyll, the Wendigo, or any character whose descent reveals their deepest truths. And yes, we are absolutely going to compare you to fictional villains, mythological monsters, and trickster spirits. It's going to be great. So grab your metaphorical wand, your journal, and maybe a glass of water because we're going to confront some demons today. Let's get into it. Humans don't just fear external threats. We fear ourselves. We fear losing control, becoming unrecognizable, or stepping outside the moral identity we've built like a fragile Lego tower. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, yes, the Stanford experiment guy, argued that the right set of circumstances can turn almost anyone into their own worst nightmare. He called it the Lucifer effect, and while the name is dramatic, the concept hits home. We fear the monster because we know we're capable of becoming it. That's why Anakin Skywalker hits us in the soft emotional kidneys. He doesn't just wake up one day and say, "Yes, today I will commit evil." No, he breaks slowly, just like ordinary people do. And here's the kicker: the line between self protection and self destruction is razor thin. Let's talk about Gollum, Middle Earth's original poster child for "my coping mechanisms have devolved into chaos." Gollum didn't become a monster overnight. He became one through centuries of micro choices: envy, isolation, obsession, avoidance. Every time he said, "No, no, no, this isn't a problem," it absolutely was a problem. The years he spent alone with the One Ring caused him to be obsessed with it and simultaneously hate it. This feeling of being torn is what caused his split personality. On the one side, he had childish and innocent Smeagol. On the other side, he had angry, cruel, and obsessed Gollum. During his centuries alone with the One Ring, Gollum also ends up completely convincing himself of many things. If you didn't know, or if you forgot, Gollum came by the ring by unaliving the OG Smeagol. That OG Smeagol found it in a riverbed on his birthday, and Gollum couldn't resist the temptation, so he unalived Smeagol in order to have it. This is what began his psychological break. Eventually, the first thing Gollum convinces himself of is that the ring was a birthday present. This is when Gollum is starting to take on Smeagol's identity. Smeagol had found the ring on his birthday, therefore the ring must be a gift. Eventually, Bilbo Baggins comes along and accidentally takes the ring after winning a riddle contest, making Gollum convince himself that Bilbo is a thief. To help him cope with his fear of Sauron and his miserable life, Gollum convinces himself that he will one day get the ring back and become Gollum the Great, and grow strong and live a wondrous, fulfilled life. Gollum convinced himself of many other things along the way, things that were never true or that were probably impossible. It's not just Gollum either. We lie to ourselves all the time. Whether it's to cope, protect self image, or maintain a sense of control, it's hard to stop ourselves. Psychologist Robert Trivers, who studied self deception, says we lie to ourselves because it helps us lie to others more convincingly. If we practice on ourselves enough, we find it easier to convince others of the things we've convinced ourselves of. The problem with lying to ourselves is we eventually believe what we're saying to ourselves. And the truth comes out later and much messier than we could ever imagine. Every time you say, I'm fine, when everything feels like it's burning to the ground, is only going to make you more miserable later. Even if you eventually do convince yourself you're fine, the ways that you're not will come through at the worst possible moment. Every time you say, this is just who I am, you're preventing yourself from growing and evolving. If you find yourself saying this often, you may just be scared of change, which is a normal feeling. But you know what? Everyone changes. It may not be flawless, and sure, you might lose some people along the way, but ask yourself this. If those people leave when you're becoming someone better, were they worth keeping around in the first place? Gollum deceives himself so thoroughly that he becomes two separate beings. Smeagol, the socially acceptable LinkedIn profile, and Gollum, the unfiltered group chat at 2 a.m. We all have both, only most of us manage to keep it in one body. Which leads me to my next example, Dr. Jekyll. He is the literary embodiment of, I can totally control this. Spoiler alert, he cannot. He tries to separate his noble self from his dark desires, but by trying to exile the shadow, he actually magnifies it. Mm. Quick recap in case you don't remember how this goes. Dr. Jekyll is a well respected scientist who is ashamed of his vices. So, in order to keep up appearances, he develops a potion that transforms him into somebody completely different, so he can enjoy his good self and his evil self. Mr. Hyde was meant to protect Jekyll's identity. And at first, Jekyll has complete control over these transformations, and he thoroughly enjoys it. He's able to say and do things he could never get away with as Dr. Jekyll. But Mr. Hyde begins to get out of control and commit violent acts. Eventually, a time comes when Mr. Hyde is able to come out all on his own, making Dr. Jekyll lose complete control and become trapped in Mr. Hyde. Hyde became something Dr. Jekyll feared, but he ended up becoming him anyway. If you don't want to know how this ends, this is your spoiler alert warning. In the end, Dr. Jekyll unalives himself in order to defeat Mr. Hyde. It's tragic, really. We all have a side of ourselves that doesn't align with the status quo, and we would love to unleash it. I mean, just check out any episode I've done about villains. Dr. Jekyll tried to find a way to be both versions, and it got away from him in the worst way. Psychologist Richard Schwartz, the creator of internal family systems, would say that Jekyll didn't need to delete Hyde. He just needed to understand him. Schwartz's research is based on people who describe themselves as having different parts within themselves. IFS is designed to help people work with these internal parts in order to access a core self, characterized by compassion and calm. The biggest thing Schwartz discovered in his research was that if people just paid attention to these parts and met their needs, they could access a state of calm, confidence, and compassion, which he called the self. He has 3 parts that he outlines. Managers, Hyde in this case, the parts that protect us and prevent triggers to keep things under control. Exiles, the parts of ourselves that are vulnerable and carry the pain of past traumas. And lastly, the self, a complete version of us that has confidence, calmness, and compassion. Hyde wasn't a villain. He was a protector who went rogue, a wounded part of the self wearing brass knuckles. And if we're being honest, we all have one of those. Which part of yourself comes out of you most often? We often talk about popular stories on this channel. So many people are familiar with superheroes and famous literature. But there are so many Indigenous traditions that understand the inner monster in ways that Western psychology still struggles to catch up with. So, I'm going to briefly cover a few powerful examples. The Wendigo isn't just a creature. It's a warning about unchecked hunger, greed, and survival instincts turned inward. To be selfish and greedy can lead to destruction. That's how becoming a Wendigo begins. Taking too much instead of having things in moderation turns you into a bad guy. The tales of the Wendigo are meant to be cautionary, warnings about what can happen when you isolate yourself and take everything for yourself instead of sharing it amongst your fellow community members. Often, these situations in Wendigo tales happen because it's winter and resources are scarce, so people abandon their self control, which turns them into flesh eating monsters. You become a Wendigo not because you're evil, but because you've abandoned balance. The moral isn't destroy the monster, it's restore humanity. Skinwalker tales often highlight what happens when someone pursues power without grounding. Skinwalkers are sorcerers who have gained the ability to shapeshift into animals like coyotes, bears, and deer. They transform into these animals so they can carry out harmful deeds. Remember Mr. Hyde? Same idea. The skinwalkers use their magic in evil ways, such as causing harm, controlling the minds of others, causing disease, and deceiving others through mimicry. Becoming a skinwalker shows you the dangers of separating yourself from community and responsibility. Skinwalkers master dark magic instead of staying connected to their roots and doing things in the traditional ways. Again, the monster is a fractured version of the self. A more modern example of what can happen when we don't address our feelings and our fears is the Babadook. In the film, the Babadook is a physical representation of a mother's grief that went unresolved. Not only has this woman lost her husband, but she also can't function properly as a mother because she is so grief stricken. She resents being a mom because her son is a constant reminder of the death of her husband. The Babadook brings her latent desire to harm her son to the surface, representing a part of herself that contradicts societal expectations of being a good mother. We could relate this to Freud's theory of the id, the ego, and the superego. In this case, the Babadook is the mother's id, her primal, unfiltered emotions like anger and rage. Because she hasn't addressed her emotions, the id overpowers the rational ego. The Babadook is not something that needed to be destroyed. It was something that needed to be understood. Seeing a theme here? The Babadook is a part of her. It needs to be named, addressed, and coexisted with. Once she's able to realize that, she's able to contain it. Knowing where it is, knowing it will always be part of her, but knowing how to deal with it at the same time. We all have a Babadook, something we have to admit is part of us that feels uncomfortable. If we don't learn to coexist with that part of ourselves, it may just take over completely. Now, let's talk about your inner beast. Don't worry, I'm not assuming you've become a Wendigo or force choked coworker recently. But here's the truth. Most people become the monster when they are stressed out, hurt, overwhelmed, or disconnected. Here are some examples. You fear abandonment, so you become clingy or distant. You fear manipulation, so you become controlling. You fear judgment, so you judge others first. You fear failure, so you sabotage yourself before you can fail. Boom. Monster unlocked. This is what social psychologist Claude Steele calls identity threat response. When our sense of self is threatened, we do weird things to protect the story we want to believe about ourselves. We do things like distorting information. This helps us make the information less threatening to our worldview. We also try to justify things, make up excuses for the threatening information instead of accepting it. And lastly, we deny information. If we don't acknowledge it, it can't hurt us. At least, that's what we want to believe. Sometimes these things look monstrous, but it's part of a transformation that can be beautiful. as long as we take the time to understand our psyche. Look, you can't heal what you won't face. You can't grow from a shadow you pretend isn't there. The monster is a mirror, and mirrors, annoyingly, show us everything. When the Wendigo thinks about eating a fellow hunter, when Gollum confronts Smeagol, when Jekyll realizes Hyde is him, that's when the healing could have started. Psychologist Kristen Neff's research on self compassion shows that we grow far more from honest self awareness than from shame or suppression. So, if you're seeing yourself becoming something you fear, it's not the end of your story. It's your origin story of integration. Remember, shadow integration isn't about getting rid of it, it's about listening to it. And here are 3 Mage friendly steps that are 100% backed up by research. Step 1, name it. This is emotional granularity from Lisa Feldman Barrett. Her research shows that people who can name their emotions with precision gain more control over them. So instead of saying, I'm angry, try saying, I feel threatened, or I feel overlooked, or I feel disconnected. You're not naming the monster, you're giving it a language. Step 2, befriend it. This is IFS and compassion based therapy. Talk to the part of you that's acting out. Say, what are you trying to protect me from? It sounds weird because it is weird, but it works. Your inner Hyde usually isn't trying to ruin your life. They're trying to keep you safe using outdated software. Step 3, rebuild the conditions. This is Zimbardo and the environmental design. Instead of willpower, change the environment. If you fear becoming controlling, create spaces that encourage collaboration. If you fear becoming avoidant, set gentle accountability. If you fear becoming like someone who hurt you, learn the opposite behaviors on purpose. You're not fixing the monster, you're feeding the human. So, fellow mages, if this week's episode stirred up some shadows, good. Transformation often begins in the dark. Remember, the monster isn't your downfall, it's your guide. Your inner Gollum, your inner Hyde, your inner Babadook, they aren't here to destroy you, they're here to reveal you. If this episode resonated, share it with someone who's been doing their own shadow work, someone on the edge of transformation, someone who might be afraid of their own reflection, but ready to look anyway. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and send this to a friend who loves psychology, myth, or the occasional monster metaphor. Until next week, make it make magic.